actually had dreams about her, that she was grown up and she was this crazy, happy girl.
I think college is when it really hit me. I went to school, and it's like, this is something she would have done. She was such a smart, fun-loving kid. Like, she would have had so much fun at college.
She'd be the older version of her 6-year-old self. She'd be a confident girl. She'd be beautiful, and she would enjoy everything that she chose to do in life.
Let us guide you through the intricate maze of contradictions surrounding JonBenet Ramsey's bedwetting, a seemingly innocent childhood issue that became the centerpiece of devastating accusations, contrasting family testimonies, and investigative theories that would tear a grieving family apart. The Great Divide, family versus police theories. In the shadowy aftermath of JonBenet's death, a chilling divide emerged between those who knew the little girl intimately and those determined to solve her case at any cost. The question of bedwetting became not just a minor detail, but a battleground where truth and theory collided with explosive force. When detectives pressed Patsy Ramsey in that fateful April 1997 interview, she spoke openly, without hesitation or shame. Yes, JonBenet would occasionally wet the bed. The admission came naturally, matter-of-factly, as any mother might discuss her child's growing pains. She explained the practical measures they'd taken, the plastic wrap protecting JonBenet's mattress, the careful distinction from Burke's unprotected bed, the gentle midnight relocations when JonBenet fell asleep in the wrong room. By June 1998, as the investigation's net tightened around her, Patsy's voice carried the weariness of a mother defending the memory of her lost child. Not very often, she insisted, perhaps once a week, maybe twice a week. But listen to her tone. There was no frustration, no hint of the rage investigators imagined. Instead, there was the patient voice of a mother who had weathered far greater storms. She had watched her older children navigate the same developmental hurdle. She had emerged victorious from a battle with stage 4 ovarian cancer. How could something so trivial as wet sheets drive her to madness? John Ramsey's testimony painted an even more telling picture. Here was a father genuinely uncertain about the frequency of his daughter's accidents, not sure, he admitted, believing it merely part of childhood's natural progression. His words carried the casual dismissal of a man who had seen 3 older children through the same phase. Very normal in our family, he declared, a sentiment that would later be twisted into something sinister by those seeking guilt where none existed. But in the sterile rooms, where investigators crafted their theories, a darker narrative took shape. The police, according to sources close to the case, believed something far more sinister had unfolded that Christmas night. In their minds, Patsy, the cancer survivor, the devoted mother, had transformed into a monster. They theorized she had lost her temper with JonBenet in the middle of the night when she wet the bed, that this gentle woman had somehow done something crazy, then methodically staged a crime before finishing her off. The accusation was breathtaking in its cruelty. John Ramsey would later describe the police theory with barely contained outrage. They had imagined that Patsy, on a peaceful Christmas night, had descended into rage because her little girl may have wet the bed. He called it lunacy, and who could blame him? This was a woman who had stared death in the face and emerged grateful for every moment with her children. Patsy herself, when confronted with this bedwetting rage theory, could only call it absurd. The woman who had survived cancer's ravages, who understood the true fragility of life, was accused of destroying her child over something she described as minuscule in the big picture. The first devastating truth emerges here, one that challenges the very foundation of the investigation. Those who have observed and interacted with Patsy consistently describe her as a gentle, soft-hearted individual who appears genuinely incapable of the kind of explosive anger that would be required for such a scenario. Her emotional sensitivity seems to extend beyond typical maternal protectiveness into a realm where even minor disturbances cause her significant distress. This emotional fragility manifests in various ways, from her reported fear of small creatures like lizards to her profound grief responses following tragedy. The contrast between this delicate emotional constitution and the calculated rage required for the bedwetting theory creates a psychological inconsistency that challenges the plausibility of this narrative. Furthermore, Patsy's reaction to her daughter's death provides additional insight into her character. Rather than displaying any signs of relief or detachment that might suggest guilt, she demonstrated the kind of overwhelming grief that appears to affect her on multiple levels, both mental and physical. This comprehensive emotional and physiological response to loss suggests someone whose love for her child was genuine and whose suffering was authentic. When considering the family's socioeconomic status and the level of comfort they had achieved, it becomes difficult to imagine that bedwetting, a common childhood issue, would represent such a significant disruption to Patsy's life that it would trigger rage. Her investment in their lifestyle and her apparent devotion to JonBenet suggests that she would more likely seek solutions to such problems rather than react with destructive anger. Yet questions linger like shadows in the corridors of this case. The second area of concern involves the family's characterization of bedwetting as a normal occurrence across multiple children and generations. While Jon and Patsy Ramsey consistently present bedwetting as a typical experience within their household, this normalization raises questions about whether their perspective aligns with broader societal standards. The specific details they provide, such as Burke coming downstairs with clean underwear after accidents or children changing beds during the night, suggest a level of ongoing accommodation that indicates a persistent pattern rather than occasional incidents. Their casual acceptance of these behaviors, while potentially genuine, may reflect family dynamics that differ significantly from what most families would consider routine. The generational aspect of this normalization becomes particularly significant when examining whether such patterns extend beyond the immediate family unit. The suggestion that both Jon's and Patsy's extended families would share similar experiences with prolonged potty training challenges seems statistically unlikely. Most families do not continue to experience regular bedwetting issues with children approaching 10 years of age, and the convergence of two separate family lines with identical experiences raises questions about the accuracy of this characterization. This potential discrepancy between the Ramsey family's definition of normal and broader societal expectations could indicate either unusual family circumstances or a possible reframing of events to minimize their significance. The third point of analysis focuses on apparent contradictions between Jon and Patsy's stated levels of awareness regarding their children's bathroom habits. Jon's statements reveal a complex relationship with the topic, where he simultaneously claims limited knowledge of any bedwetting problems while demonstrating detailed awareness of specific behavioral patterns. His assertion that he wouldn't classify JonBenet's situation as a bedwetting problem contrasts sharply with his ability to recognize and interpret Burke's nighttime activities with clean underwear. This selective awareness suggests either inconsistent attention to his children's needs or a deliberate minimization of issues that he actually monitored closely. The division of responsibility between the parents also creates logical inconsistencies in their accounts. Jon's characterization of potty training as Patsy's job, while maintaining ignorance about the extent of any problems, becomes problematic when paired with his demonstrated awareness of the children's nighttime behaviors. A parent who truly delegates such responsibilities and maintains distance from these issues would be unlikely to possess the observational knowledge that Jon displays about Burke's patterns. This contradiction suggests either a more involved parental role than Jon acknowledges, or a coordinated effort to present a unified narrative that minimizes the significance of bedwetting within their household. The discrepancy raises questions about the authenticity of their portrayal and whether their statements accurately reflect the family dynamics surrounding this issue. Thus, a direct contradiction emerges like a fault line through the investigation. The family consistently portrayed bedwetting as a minor, normal childhood event, while certain police theories elevated it to a primary motive for unspeakable acts. Burke's voice, innocence or calculated minimization. In the swirling maelstrom of accusations and theories, one voice remained notably calm, almost eerily detached from the chaos surrounding his family. Burke Ramsey, speaking years later on Dr. Phil's show, offered his own recollections of JonBenét's bedwetting with the kind of casual indifference that would either vindicate his family or damn him further. "I just remember she wet her bed," Burke stated with remarkable simplicity. His words carried no emotional weight, no hint of the rage that some theorists attributed to him. He recalled the routine with almost clinical detachment. Mom would change the sheets and all that stuff, while Dad wouldn't really do anything because he had to go to work in the morning. To Burke, this was nothing more than ordinary family life. "I think every kid does that. You just have to be like, it'd be kind of embarrassing, but parents would just clean it up." The way Burke delivered these recollections was perhaps as significant as their content. His tone carried the matter-of-fact quality of someone recounting mundane childhood memories, the way another child might describe taking out the trash or feeding the family pet. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no careful parsing of words that might suggest he was guarding against revealing too much. His casual mention of his father's work schedule as an explanation for maternal responsibility suggested a child who had simply observed family patterns without questioning their fairness or appropriateness. Most striking was Burke's universal characterization of bedwetting as a shared childhood experience. When he said, "I think every kid does that," he wasn't making a scientific claim about developmental milestones. He was revealing his genuine belief that what happened in the Ramsey household represented the universal human experience. This perspective could indicate either remarkable innocence about how other families functioned or a carefully constructed narrative designed to normalize what might have been unusual circumstances. What made Burke's testimony particularly compelling or disturbing, depending on one's perspective, was the complete absence of any emotional resonance when discussing his sister's death and the circumstances surrounding it. Here was a young man who had lived through the unimaginable horror of losing his sister under the most unfavorable circumstances, yet when discussing the intimate details of family life that had become central to theories about her demise, he spoke with the emotional flatness of someone reading a grocery list. This detachment could be interpreted as the natural result of years of psychological protection, the mind's way of creating distance from trauma too overwhelming to process fully. Yet this same emotional distance could also be seen as deeply troubling by those who expected to see more raw human emotion when discussing the final days and hours of his sister's life. The lack of visible grief, anger, or even frustration when confronted with theories that painted him as a potential perpetrator struck some observers as unnaturally controlled. Was this the composed response of an innocent person who had been wrongly accused for years, or was it the carefully managed presentation of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous conversational territory with practiced ease? The timing of Burke's public emergence also raised questions about the strategic nature of his statements. For years, the Ramsey family had shielded Burke from public scrutiny, maintaining that his status as a minor and a witness required protection from media exposure. When he finally chose to speak publicly as an adult, it came at a moment when renewed attention was being focused on the case, particularly theories that implicated him directly. His decision to address these allegations head-on could be seen as the brave choice of an innocent person finally able to defend himself, or as a calculated move to control the narrative before others could define it for him. But Burke's seemingly innocent recollections would be twisted into something far more sinister by those determined to find guilt within the Ramsey walls. The CBS documentary, in its relentless pursuit of a narrative that placed Burke at the center of tragedy, painted a horrifying picture. They alleged that JonBenet had wet her bed and crawled in the bed with Burke, who let loose his pent-up rage and lashed out at her physically. The accusation was stunning in its specificity and its cruelty. Here was a child being accused of destroying his sister over something he himself described as merely embarrassing but normal. The documentary's narrative required viewers to believe that Burke's calm recollections masked a history of explosive behavior, that his casual tone concealed memories of uncontrollable fury, They painted a picture of a boy so consumed with rage over bedwetting incidents that he would resort to deadly force against his younger sister. When confronted with these theories during his Dr. Phil interview, Burke's response was telling. He had heard the cover-up part, but had not heard the wet the bed should have rage theme. His apparent surprise suggested either genuine ignorance of this theory or a carefully constructed facade of innocence. The fact that he acknowledged awareness of cover-up allegations while claiming ignorance of the rage component created an interesting dynamic. Was this selective knowledge the result of family protection, personal psychological defense mechanisms, or strategic preparation for the interview? Burke's statements about bedwetting provide corroboration for Patsy's described behavior patterns, particularly regarding her role in managing these incidents. His recollection that mom would change the sheets and all that stuff aligns with the physical evidence found at the scene where bedding had been removed from JonBenet's bed. The presence of urine-stained sheets discovered during the investigation takes on new significance when viewed through the lens of Burke's testimony about his mother's routine response to bedwetting incidents. This correlation between witness statements and physical evidence suggests that Patsy may have indeed changed bedding on the night in question, despite any suggestions to the contrary in her formal statements. The timing and circumstances of this potential sheet-changing activity become crucial elements in understanding the sequence of events. If Patsy was already awake and moving through the house during the early morning hours, her discovery of bedwetting and subsequent cleaning activities could explain both the missing bedding and her presence in various areas of the home. Burke's testimony provides a behavioral baseline that helps investigators understand what would constitute normal activity for Patsy during such incidents. The consistency between Burke's recollections and the physical evidence discovered at the scene creates a foundation for understanding at least some of the activities that may have occurred during the critical time period. Yet, beneath Burke's calm exterior, darker questions stirred. The analysis of Burke's potential emotional responses requires careful consideration of childhood development and the complexities of sibling relationships. Children often struggle with concepts that adults assume they understand, and the gap between parental expectations and childhood comprehension can create situations where normal developmental responses are misinterpreted. In the context of bedwetting and shared sleeping spaces, a child Burke's age might reasonably experience frustration or displeasure without necessarily having the emotional regulation skills to manage these feelings appropriately. The challenge lies in determining whether normal childhood reactions could escalate beyond typical sibling conflict. The responsibility for helping children develop appropriate emotional responses falls largely on parents, who must consistently reinforce expectations and help children understand acceptable ways to express frustration. If John and Patsy were not adequately addressing potential conflicts between the children regarding bedwetting and bedroom sharing, ordinary childhood tensions could potentially develop into more significant issues. However, this analysis must be balanced against the understanding that most children navigate these types of sibling challenges without serious incident, and that assuming the worst-case outcome requires substantial additional evidence beyond normal childhood dynamics. The search for plausible motives in this case leads to consideration of how different individuals might respond to bedwetting-related frustrations. While various theories have been proposed regarding adult reactions to such incidents, the psychological profile of potential responses must consider factors such as emotional maturity, impulse control, and stress tolerance. From a developmental perspective, younger individuals typically demonstrate less sophisticated emotional regulation and may respond more dramatically to situations that adults would handle with patience and understanding. This consideration becomes relevant when evaluating which family members might theoretically be more susceptible to inappropriate reactions to bedwetting incidents. However, the concept of rage in response to bedwetting must be carefully qualified, as there exists a significant distinction between normal frustration and dangerous anger. While anyone might reasonably feel annoyed by unexpected contact with bodily fluids, the critical factor becomes the behavioral response to such feelings rather than the initial emotional reaction itself. Most individuals, regardless of age, managed to express their displeasure through appropriate channels without resorting to harmful actions. The investigation must therefore focus on evidence of actual behavioral responses rather than theoretical emotional reactions. While acknowledging that some element of intense emotion appears to have played a role in the events of that night, regardless of its specific source or target, Burke's downplaying of JonBenet's bedwetting as simply embarrassing but normal became a Rorschach test for interpretation. Was this the honest recollection of a brother who had lived through ordinary childhood experiences? Or was it the calculated response of someone desperate to shield his family or himself from suspicion? The weight of contradiction, what forensic truth reveals. In the unforgiving arena of forensic investigation, contradictions are not merely inconsistencies, they are roadmaps to truth, pointing toward either deception or fundamental flaws in the theories being pursued. The bedwetting contradiction in the Ramsey case would prove to be both a source of endless speculation and ultimately a window into the troubling nature of the investigation itself. The CBS documentary's approach to the case revealed the dangerous territory investigators can enter when theory drives evidence rather than evidence driving theory. The lawsuit filed by Burke Ramsey painted a damning picture of their methods, a purported reinvestigation that was focused on disputing aspects of the Smith intruder theory and focusing exclusively on Burke. According to the legal filing, the documentary failed to meaningfully examine and recklessly dismissed explanations for JonBenet's death other than the conclusion that Burke was responsible. The documentary's pseudo-experts allegedly manipulated Burke's behavior, showing him demonstrating how JonBenet might have been killed, highlighting his failure to ask Detective Patterson questions as evidence of guilt. They emphasize that Burke doesn't seem to be concerned at all and exhibits no appropriate emotion. The Ramsey defense team fired back with fury, claiming the documentary purposefully avoided and ignored the overwhelming evidence that established that Burke did not kill his sister and recklessly disregarded verifiable denials from Burke, his family, and law enforcement. John Andrew Ramsey reminded the world that there is no handbook on how to act when you're going through the loss of a child. Yet three final mysteries refuse to be silenced. The battle over Burke's character and the family's credibility extends far beyond the courtroom into the realm of public perception and investigative integrity. Those defending the Ramsey family consistently point to alleged bias against them, while critics argue that this deflection obscures genuine evidence of involvement. The reality reveals itself in the stark contrast between public perception and official findings. Even those who maintain skepticism about the family readily acknowledge that the Ramseys appear to be genuinely pleasant, likable people in personal interactions. However, as critics rightfully point out, the capacity for niceness does not preclude the possibility of criminal behavior, and investigators must look beyond surface impressions to examine concrete evidence. The forensic evidence presents a complex puzzle that seems to suggest some level of family involvement, creating tension with the official exonerations. The presence of fibers from Patsy's shirt at the crime scene, along with fibers from John's clothing, raises questions about their movements that night. Burke's fingerprints on a tea glass and Patsy's prints on a pineapple bowl found at the scene add another layer of complexity, particularly given that these items were reportedly positioned at the family's usual seating locations at the table. The striking similarities between Patsy's handwriting and the ransom note continue to fuel speculation among handwriting analysts and amateur investigators alike. Perhaps most troubling to critics is the scenario they paint of an intruder who somehow managed to use exclusively Ramsey family belongings against them while leaving no trace of his own DNA, a feat that stretches credibility to its breaking point. John Ramsey's characterization of the police investigation as attempting to fit a square peg in a round hole has become a rallying cry for those who believe the family was unjustly targeted. However, this narrative of victimization faces its own logical challenges. The claim that police harbored vindictive feelings toward the family seems inconsistent with the Ramseys' demonstrated ability to maintain positive relationships with other authority figures, including district attorneys who ultimately defended them. If the Ramseys possessed the social skills and likability that enabled them to win over prosecutors and maintain public sympathy, the question arises as to why they struggled so significantly with law enforcement officers across multiple investigative teams and leadership changes. The persistence of police suspicion across different regimes suggests that the issues may have been more substantive than mere personality conflicts or investigative bias. From a forensic perspective, the task becomes separating legitimate skepticism from unfair persecution, evidence-based concerns from predetermined conclusions. The repeated official exonerations of Burke and the family, coupled with documented criticisms of investigative bias, suggest that their consistent denial of bedwetting as a significant problem should be interpreted as evidence of theoretical flaws rather than deceptive behavior. The ultimate irony is that in seeking to prove the bedwetting rage theory, investigators may have revealed more about their own biases than about the guilt or innocence of the Ramsey family. The task for true forensic investigators is to remain objective, collecting information and allowing the evidence to speak rather than forcing it into predetermined narratives. In the end, the bedwetting contradiction serves as a microcosm of everything wrong with the JonBenet Ramsey investigation. The rush to judgment, the tunnel vision, the willingness to ignore exculpatory evidence in service of a compelling but ultimately flawed theory. The real tragedy is not just that a little girl lost her life, but that in the desperate search for someone to blame, the very people who loved her most became victims of an investigation that lost sight of its most fundamental obligation, the pursuit of truth. The truth may never be legally proven, but the shadows of that truth continue to darken everything they fall upon. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more storytelling analysis like this.